Unfortunately, I think a lot of horror things just think about, how do I get to the scare? It's missing the point. The conversations we had were 95% about character, perspective, and intention, and 5% about the scare.
I started seeing her when I was a kid, all the time when I was a kid.
You want a scare to land. You want it to mean something, and you want it not to just evaporate and make people giggle and check their phones.
But then he came into my life and she went away. And then she killed him.
I'm drawn to stories of deep human emotion because I can't stop thinking about that in my life. I'd like to show it to you. Storytelling in general is how we dissect these big emotions.
I just want to know if he's still here.
He's not.
And that only works if the characters are working and if the scare is an extension of what the character is going through. Why is this happening? Why is this character here?
I loved you completely, and you loved me the same.
You've got to choose your character perspective, make sure you're telling the right story, and make sure that that scare is the natural additive progression of that moment.
In this interview, we sit down with Mike Flanagan, the master horror filmmaker who brought you Haunting of Hill House, Midnight Mass, Doctor Sleep, and will be directing the reboot of The Exorcist. We're also interviewing the editor of Mike's last project, The Fall of the House of Usher, Brett Bachman, to understand how to master effective horror editing and deep filmmaking storytelling. They showed us how they used the progression of color to foreshadow impending doom. Mike explains how it's better to be an editor first, then a filmmaker, and how Brett went against Mike and removed shots to tell a better story. And we begin with a magnificent editing breakdown from Brett on Mike's most gruesome scene, the Factory Massacre. This is the Editing Podcast, recorded on Riverside. If you're new here, please subscribe. And remember, here's the graphic warnings. So even Brett, for you, what's your objective here with all of this? What are you trying to achieve with these sequences of shots?
Well, it's twofold. The first is to create a sense of intrigue and interest and suspense with this character coming in the front doors.
The world was on fire, no one could save me but you.
Camera work, the cinematography, everything, the music is telling you this is a figure of significant importance.
I never dreamed that I'd meet somebody like you.
So it's about creating a sense of teasing this individual. Who is this? And experiencing this through Perry's point of view. The sense of this figure that is mysterious, aloof, stunningly beautiful, but wanting to get a sense of more information about her, but creating the distance, favoring these camera angles where we're back with him, seeing her going through the crowd, losing her occasionally. I want the audience to feel like they want to know who this woman is, but they're being held back. Also has to go back to episode 1, with the very end of that episode, with us teasing that there's a woman that Roderick Usher has to tell Dupont about.
There's a woman.
I know that face. You know her too.
Woman I have to tell you about.
What did she do to them?
Tell me about the creative choice of color contrast here, where everyone's bathed in blue light, but then the Raven dressed in red. So she's standing out so much more here.
And that was a very, very intentional conversation I had with the DP, and also he co-directed the show, Mike Flanagan. We wanted to layer the color red in very specifically into this scene. And it was never to come into this thing until Verna entered the room. And Verna was going to introduce the color into the palette for this whole sequence. We intentionally had to make sure that no one else's wardrobe incorporated red. She's the only one. We have lights programmed that are rolling this blue and gold and green through the whole thing, but only after she arrives do the lights begin to cycle red into it, and it increases in its use over the course of it, also timed to the music, so that by the time we get to the sprinklers, we are all red. What I loved about it was that the red of our lighting would give way to the red of the blood and the viscera of the melted bodies. And that's our final red is the gore. But there are interstitial steps. You know, here we're teasing it out. The scene right after this, where Perry follows her into the room. One of the really important things about when you do a scene with red like this, you need to use colors that are actively not red. Like, see how we leaned into white and yellow coming out of the lamps and painting the walls, because otherwise it looks like we just put a red filter over it, color correction. And so the color only pops if it's not the overwhelming color. We have to be very judicious about where we deploy it. But here you see, you know, she's bathed in it. She is the color red. On his reverse, though, you know, you've got elements of it, but it's him being drawn further and deeper into that color.
Wow, that's a fantastic detail. Using color to visualize and progress the story. It's a really interesting way of putting it, but I get it now. Hi. I mean, this is a bit awkward because in the interviews that I do, I tend to try to feel very confident. But before most of those interviews start, this happens. Don't screw this up. Don't screw this up. It's okay, Hayden. It's only one of the biggest editors in the industry that you really want to get into. You're not going to say something stupid and screw up your entire career, are you? Yes, you are, because this is what you do. Oh, no. I mean, why am I even doing this? I'm just a hack. I'm just a fraud. I don't know how to edit at all. Hey guys, this is going to be a great interview. Before every interview, I am absolutely terrified. So it's really important that the equipment that I use works efficiently, and the best tool that just works in the background and pretty much just runs the whole thing is Riverside. Riverside is the all-in-one video podcasting studio. I can easily connect with all of my guests and their video feed. And then after that interview, I can very simply gather all of my guests' footage and audio with their multi-track recording system. In simple terms, I have each of the guests' video and audio separately. And then Riverside has changed the game again with their new AI-enhanced video editor that radically cuts down on your editing time. That's the part of the edit that no one wants to do. Let's just let AI do that. Their new editor comes with tons of features, including one of the most underrated, their transcription-based editing. So if a guest goes on an incoherent ramble, or honestly most likely me doing that, you can search that section to cut and delete it in your video immediately. It's like editing a Word document. It makes editing so much easier. So yeah, I dare you. Sign up to Riverside. It starts off free. And then you can use the code editingpodcast for 15% off. Anyway, thank you for listening. I think this was probably quite rude for me to be doing this in front of the guests. So let's get back to the interview.
I chose this guest list very carefully, and I have no idea who you are.
You can take off your mask, Prospero.
What are you trying to achieve with this, and why?
I want to convey a sense of power. The second we cut inside this red room, I want the audience to feel like Perry is in way over his element. It's a bit of the choreography. It's a bit of the visual grammar of the scene. Embracing, some of these wides where she's just relatively small, but it's clear the frame is focused on her. Like we're driving towards this character, and your entire focus is meant to be right here.
Like we're kind of taught in visual language, the more someone's smaller in frame, the less powerful they are. But this is kind of the opposite, where she does seem very powerful. She is kind of dominating a lot of the frame because we do see her entire body, and then with Prospero's, we don't see his entire body. Like he does feel weaker here for me, and that's interesting.
We've told the audience, if we've done our job right, they have some kind of emotional reaction and desire to learn more about this figure that we have teased as being a major threat. So the restraint of holding back, not cutting to that close-up immediately, it's saving that close-up, it's saving the choreography for later on in the scene where it's hopefully a bit more of an emotional punch. Of not giving the audience what they want just yet creates a sense of yearning, creates a desire, creates a internal conflict for them that hopefully gives the scene an emotional heaviness, and that's tension, that's suspense. It's also hopefully the audience recognizes that it's a little bit of a promise as well. We're starting back here, but as the scene progresses, we're going to get closer, and we're going to tell you more about this woman that we've been teasing for an hour 45 by this point.
That is the truth of this world. But you did it. And it's everything you imagined. And there's still time.
To what?
my favorite moment of the scene is when we cut to that profile for the first time.
Things like this, all things in fact, have consequences.
Hopefully it telegraphs that this is not going the way Perry expected. And that's when we cut to this profile. We cut to this wide shot that has this heaviness and this air, the suspense of what's going to happen after that. Is that a threat? And you're meant to kind of feel this this POV shift, this charge in the room, hopefully, has come across. And then as the scene continues to progress,
have consequences.
We're living a little bit more in these profiles.
I mean, that's the whole point. You didn't read the invite?
There are always consequences.
Suddenly, this woman who Perry thought he was bonding with, she becomes more mysterious. She becomes a bit more threatening. The music changes, and we introduce this ethereal drone, this piece that is making you a bit more uncomfortable.
Then another, and then a big one, and then one of absolutely no importance. And then by and by, you were born.
We begin to kind of live in the profiles a little bit more. This emotional attachment that you thought you were getting with this woman is a bit broken. Now you're living in the side profiles and feeling a little bit more alienated.
And that choice defined your whole life. You are consequence, Perry.
And as this conversation progresses,
I've always liked the bad boys.
We're starting back here.
Got a weakness, I suppose.
We get into this crane move. We're going to get closer.
And you bad boy.
We linger on the shot. Creates a heaviness. Fully in control of the situation.
You are
and there's a power dynamic.
Pretty little thing.
There is this looming danger that I thought was the crux of the scene and kind of the major point of it. We have this little visual trickery with her popping against the other side of the room, hiding that in the cut. You know, the music coming back in and switching and changing.
Wait!
He's coming back into the party, and there's a sense of want, there's a sense of urgency, there's a sense of mystery that is being carried over from the last scene. And a large part of that desire is going to fuel the momentum that's going to be building over the next 2 minutes. From a story perspective, my goal is to make you feel like something is about to go down. That's selecting a piece of music that is a little higher tempo, that's a little bit more urgent, creating the sense of dissonance and intrigue, the sensation of watching a scene and you want to yell at the character. You want to scream to say, just get out, as we're laying in all these breadcrumbs. You have Perry, he has ignored all this harbinger, and then you have these two other story threads that are happening in parallel to this. Verna popping around the room, warning these individuals, warning the people, telling them to leave. And then, the third parallel storyline you have is Maury. She's noticing that people are leaving the party in this vacant stare that feels odd and uncanny. And then the hand comes over her shoulder, grabs her, and says, go now. By this point, hopefully you are screaming at this character to get the hell out of the room. It's this dramatic irony that is charging this entire tension. Serving as a spine throughout all of this is this really cool, remix of 9 Inch Nails.
You let me desecrate you.
I always knew that there was going to be a point in this song where the rain was going to fall. And I think anybody who is familiar with this 9 Inch Nails track is aware that there is this, this epic breakdown toward the end of the song. Hopefully that is also charging your experience as well, that there's going to be this huge break, toward the climax that we're also building to. So you have all 4 of these things kind of working in tandem, and as an editor, that's a lot of fun. You're teasing it out. It's about how does it happen as opposed to what happens. Like I said, the dramatic irony of the characters not knowing what's about to happen, but the audience does. Hopefully, I think at this point, we've all kind of put the math together. I wanted to feel a certain way, just really delay that sense of cringe. You have this slow motion bit of the rain falling, and I just want to draw out that anticipation as long as I could. So when that rain finally hits, insanity happens. The music pumps in. You get this sense of chaos. think it's the most frantic we get in the entire episode, hopping around everywhere. Calamity as people are panicking. And you're showing like these progressions in the acid and the gore as well. For an audience to see this melting plastic and think about, what if that was skin? I want the audience to cringe when they see this shot. And they realize how corrosive and how destructive this material is. One of the things I love about this as well is that it complements the final scene in the episode so well. You're going from this very fast, very chaotic, very dissonant sequence. And then we cut out of that with a big flash. And you're not sure where the show is going to go from there. And then you land on this giant wide shot, just showing gore, soup, human soup. It's one of my favorite punctuation points in the entire series. You're going from something very fast and frenetic and not really knowing where you are, and then you just see the reveal of everything afterwards, and we linger on the shot, and you're forced to confront, and you're a little complicit, with watching all of this. And the rest of the episode, this rest of the scene, plays out, very elegantly. A bit more slow, but the study of juxtapositions here is one of the reasons I love this moment so much.
Beautiful boy.
This is probably my favorite scene to cut in the entire series, and the scene as it appears in the final episode was my first cut.
What?
Oh, wow.
Okay, Brett.
This is the assembly edit. This has not changed since the first time we put it together.
That's crazy rare.
It's very rare. I worked from home when I cut this scene. I spent an entire afternoon to cobble it together. I showed it to Mike several months later. He came by my room and knocked on my door, and he's like, I started Perry's party, and I hit spacebar, and I was only going to hit stop once I was going to make a change, and I played down the entire 20 minutes of the final episode, or like the last 15 minutes of the entire episode, and I didn't change a thing.
Okay, hello. Hope you guys have been enjoying the conversation so far. But with all of this, I would like to ask you a question. So we've all had that experience when we've been editing a music track, and there is just this one weird little element that we just don't want. Like, why do musicians put that in there? It just ruins the whole track. So as a benefit, when Track Club's Mix Lab can mean that you can get the stems. So for example, we've got this nice little piano song. Yeah, I can work with that, but I do want a bit more control, so I am going to use the Mix Lab. And look at this, all of the instruments separately. So actually, I might just like the strings. I mean, that's already a completely different tone. So the strings could be interesting, but we're also on YouTube. That actually might be a bit too slow paced. So I'm going to speed up the BPM of all of this to screw it 115. So, imagine if I'm trying to, escalate information. There's, some sort of new revelation in the story. Let's increase the pace. So I've got completely different versions of the same song. And I can download them and, of course, throw them into my edit. This tool obviously gives the editor the power to tinker and really manipulate the track that they want for their edit. You're no longer tied down to what the track is. You can make the track what you want it to be. And on top of all of this, Track Club has streamlined the copyright process, as in you won't get hit with any copyright claims when you use their music. So give Track Club a try with a 2-month free trial by clicking the link in the description. Let's get back to the conversation.
But I think also with you, Mike, it was, you were an editor first, being also a filmmaker. How did you, being an editor first, teach you how to become an overall filmmaker?
My whole career became, how do I get onto a set and acquire the pieces I need to build the edit that I'm seeing in my imagination. The first real movie I made was Oculus, and I had really wanted to edit the film myself because that was my career. And they initially told me no. We were sending dailies over to the editor that we had hired, who wasn't quite getting it. And I ran into my producer with a tablet that had all the dailies on it. And I said, no, it fits together in a very specific way. And it goes here to this out point, here, 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 here. That's the sequence, and there's the scare. And then we let go of the other editor, and I came to edit it. And that started this precedent where I was able to do that for most of my career. But my assistant editor at the time as I was sending footage from the field, was saying, I'm really worried about what happens when you get into the cutting room because we don't have nearly enough to build it.
Prove that the object behind me is responsible for at least 45 deaths in the 4 centuries of its recorded existence.
And I said, no. It's like IKEA furniture. You have everything you need, and there are going to be a couple little wooden pegs left over, but we don't have time for anything else. So it's just funny. What you need, and it fits a very specific way. And that was me being incredibly insecure and defensive, shooting that way, trying to make it so that it couldn't be edited in another configuration. I very thankfully grew out of that. At least I hope. Brett can correct me, but I don't think he was ever that limited.
No,
I hope not. I had no confidence as a writer and no confidence as a director, but I was confident that I knew what I needed to edit.
I've just moved out of my career for the past 5 years of being a reality TV editor myself. And I think that there's nothing more frustrating of like, you need to get this type of emotional beat and you're just spending sometimes days just trying to figure out how to manipulate it and trying to make that work. And I feel like maybe even for you, there's some trauma in those stressful days of trying to make an edit work. And so I feel like for you, just like, I don't want to go through this process again. Let's do the classic fix it in pre. Let's make sure I know exactly what to do. And so it's one of my favorite philosophies that we're trying to learn, which is make the edit before you make the edit.
Yes. I learned how to edit on reel-to-reels and Steenbeck's Moviolas, where you had to sit there and really visualize your cut before you ever dared to make a splice, because it was a physical decision. And before you committed to making your cut and having to glue it back together, you thought 3 or 4 times, and you visualized how it would play, and you ran it back and forth, and you forced yourself to visualize your edit in your imagination. When nonlinear editing, I'm going to sound so like, get off my lawn. When nonlinear editing showed up, it was this incredible gift, but I felt really bad for the students who didn't have the tactile experience of linear editing and of having to really visualize it that way.
What would you say to younger editors that are just coming up now that didn't have that Moviola experience? Like, how would you advise them?
Get in the habit of trying to really visualize your edit before you do it. One of my favorite Brett Bachman stories, and this has become legendary in the halls of our post-production on the fall of the House of Usher, was that our post supervisor, I was in the field, we were still shooting. Brett was on the ground, he was starting to edit the episodes. And I was very eager to have Brett on this show because I had watched enough of his work that I recognized, I was like, this is a phenomenal editor.
Wow.
And that's a language I speak very well. And so like I had kind of chased him down to say like, please come work with us because I can see the way you see your edit based on looking at the work. And it just really speaks to me. And I feel like we speak the same language. Give him what he needs. I'll be in the field. We're going to be in great hands. We have this just powerhouse editor on the show. And my post supervisor goes walking by Brett's office, by his cutting room. And he's sitting on a couch all the way in the back against the wall, probably 10 feet away from the Avid. And he's sitting, just staring at it, And she kind of looks in and says, what are you doing? Because, shouldn't you be up there? And he's just sitting there and he's staring at the screen and he says, I'm thinking. And to me, I'm like, this is the edit. This is where it happens. Like, yes, the actual sitting there, pop, and doing all the crazy Minority Report stuff you see everybody doing as they do work. Like, yeah. Cool. But a great editor spends more time doing that and visualizing and considering and remembering and dreaming out the way it can fit after you've absorbed the footage, That's amazing editing. And it's like, yes. She's like, well, this editor who you're very excited about was just kind of sitting there thinking. And I'm like, exactly. And now watch what happens, you know? And of course, Brett then gets up, sits down, and ba-boom. What you get there isn't this kind of haphazard assembly. You get a thoughtful, intentional cut.
I was not aware of this story.
Were there any editing rules that you established as you were working on the show together? Where there's anything that's like, okay, to fit this tone, this is how we would execute that editorially?
The rules are going to sound very small. It's never telegraph a scare, never let the show laugh at its own joke, never let a character laugh at their own joke. If a character laughs, the audience won't. We talked a lot about how music should never be sentimental on the show, that the show was rigidly unsentimental, which is something that's hard to bear in mind when you have actors who love to kind of pour themselves out. And we got sentimental at the end, but that was fine. But yeah, other than that, there weren't a lot of like hard and fast kind of technique rules. You know, the beauty of each episode kind of focusing on its own character meant that the episodes were different, and that we were able to play with different engines and different aesthetics, you know, depending entirely on kind of whose perspective we were in. It let us stretch. Like the approach to, you know, Prospero's orgy party in episode 2 is radically different to our aesthetic approach to like a funeral sequence in episode 5. And one of my favorite things that would frequently happen is that Brett would come in and be like, I have an idea, and it's a little outside of kind of what you might have been thinking, but I'd like to show it to you. And I think just about without exception, I think all of those ideas won.
I remember doing the assembly, prepping a timeline for Mike. I would occasionally put a little marker on the top of a clip. It'd be like this little clip. It's something for him to find. And you would unmute it, and it'd be a little note from me being like, there's an alternate cut of this scene, you know, in this location in the Avid.
What was probably the original intent of you, Mike, and then what was like Brett's reinterpretation of it?
There's a moment in episode 1 in the flashback sequence with the Usher kids. It's a lightning storm. They've just buried their mother, who's died. They look outside and they find this grave that has become empty. Under the discovery that their moth has not dead. She's somewhere in the house. As they're walking around the room, we had a scripted beat where you see Eliza in the background, I think in silhouette, and the kids don't notice where she is. And so I had built out the assembly that way with, you know, seeing a silhouette of Eliza in the background, and the conversation between Roderick and Madeline takes place.
I mean, she's probably passed out somewhere, right? I mean, she had to crawl up, break out. She probably just passed right out.
Jesus. What did we do?
And then we see Eliza for a second time.
They gotta know we didn't mean to.
One of the characters first notices her, and then we reveal with a lightning bolt and a jolt. And it was effective, and yet I had an idea to slightly recraft the scare a little bit, where you don't necessarily reveal where she is. You don't reveal that she's in the room. And it had a bit of a different sensation as an audience member going through that section of the scene following the kids. So we haven't told the audience where Eliza is. We haven't told them that she's in the kitchen or she's hiding out somewhere. And it gave another new charge to this element of the scene. You're still wondering where she is. It becomes where she is as opposed to when is she going to come out and frighten them.
And I watched it, and I think he hit stop, and I was like, show it to me again. We watched it again. And I remember saying, like, you son of a bitch. Like,
subtracting is just as important as an art form in the editing room as something, as adding something, as crafting something. What do you hide? What do you obscure? It can be a little intimidating to talk to your director or your showrunner and say, I prepared this for you. I I believe that it could work really well, but you need to take a bit of a leap with me. And that's something that I don't think we would have been able to really control and experiment, had there been more editors on the show, for instance. Having just Mike and I together, it allows this opportunity to create something that feels very unified and intentional.
You guys are approaching a lot of these scenes story first with the scare rather than prioritizing the scare. For you guys, why is that such an important rule for you? And in what instances, what are you doing to make that work?
Well, I think the thing about the scare is the end of the fun, because a scare relieves tension. It gives you a jolt, and then what everybody mostly does is they laugh. And so whatever you've built up, all that wonderful pressure gets let out of the balloon. You want a scare to land. You want it to mean something, and you want it not to just evaporate and make people giggle and check their phones. And that only works if the characters are working and if the scare is an extension of what the character is going through. So we know we're getting to a scare, but the magic trick is how do you keep people after, and how do you make the scare feel like it's added tension to the proceedings instead of dissipated it. The conversations we had were 95% about character, perspective, and intention, and 5% about the scare.
I've made that mistake, actually. I edited some ghost hunting reality TV, and I threw in those big hits and removing the sound. So I felt like you kind of directly called me out a little bit, but because I've done that. But you're right.
Too.
But
we've all done that. Yeah, we have to do it. Yeah.
Over time, when I did a few more episodes of it, I then picked up to that language a lot more. But what it is, as an editor, is we get so much more excited. Oh, I found this a really great sting sound effect. Let me find the first excuse to put it in. Yeah. But it's set up, it's context and story first.
You have to pile on the design just to remind yourself that there's nothing scarier than silence.
Oof.
That's where the tension comes from.
Yes.
And then you have to go, well, how do I design silence? Because it's not silent. You have to design the feeling of silence, and then that becomes a whole other thing. What a cool way to make a living.
You guys said something about the where and when in horror, or the where and when producing the scare or the tension and whatnot. Is there other instances for you guys when it's like, how are we establishing the where and when in the information that we're giving to an audience?
Oh, sure. I think half of that conversation happens in the writing process, and then that conversation's finished in the cutting room, because the writing is our best guess, and we're frequently wrong. Reconciling that and making sure that we're seeing the biggest picture possible, whether we're looking at the context of an episode or of the whole season, which is where the really intense conversations come from. That's part of the real joy of editing. Where, when, and why, and why gets lost a lot too. That's one of the biggest words that I think comes into play in cutting, and it's a word I know from experience that Brett hears a lot. And if that isn't answered, there's a problem. When I look at The Haunting of Hill House, there's an entire storyline that does not answer why and doesn't appear to need to be in the show. People love that show. I love that show. I'm proud of that show, but I still watch it and I go, why is this happening? Why is this character here? And it's a question that's not answered in the script. It's a question that wasn't answered on set. And it's a question that's not answered in the edit.
I'm loving that we're getting Mike roasting his own work on this show.
Roasting my own work, yeah.
This is great.
And this is the benefit of hindsight,
Yeah.
And when I look at it, I'm like a more confident editor than I was in my life at that time would have answered that question loudly in post and said, there's not a why here. Usher feels very balanced and very tight to me. Like I feel like, and it's the benefit of having an editor as talented as Brett collaborating on this. There was a lot of things I might not have seen and understood from my very kind of skewed vantage point that I come into by the time I'm in prep on something that Brett identified, that I think we whittled all that out. It's like the stuff that didn't satisfy those three criteria that you're identifying. It's maybe one of the only shows I did where I feel like we got them. We scene by scene and kind of story beat by story beat applied those criteria consistently and rigorously, even if it meant removing something we liked. And I think we accomplished that.